SpaceX just confirmed something massive. For the first time ever, a fully stacked Starship will make a 1,850-kilometer ocean voyage from Texas to Florida aboard a specialized barge currently undergoing trials at Starbase. Vice President of Launch Kiko Donchevic revealed they're finalizing preparations to transport the first Super Heavy booster and Starship to Kennedy Space Center's LC-39A, targeting a historic Florida launch in Q2 2026. But here's what nobody's talking about. Which Starship will make this journey first? And why is SpaceX rushing to move vehicles before their Florida production facility is even ready? Let's dive right in. The timing couldn't be more critical. After nearly 4 years of construction since December 2021, Launch Complex 39A's Starship pad is finally crossing the finish line. SpaceX has already knocked out 3 of the 4 major environmental checkpoints. Tank farm installed, flame trench complete, orbital launch mount standing tall. The final piece? A signature on the record of decision, expected by January 30th, 2026. But there's a catch most people aren't seeing. NASA shares LC-39A for the Artemis program, which means every sonic boom analysis, every debris trajectory study, every environmental impact assessment has been scrutinized 3 times over. The FAA isn't just waiting on paperwork. They're waiting on real flight data from Starship V3 tests at Starbase to update their models with actual performance metrics, not estimates. So even after that January 30th deadline passes, SpaceX still needs final sign-offs from both the FAA and Space Force. What does that mean for the first Florida launch? We're looking at the second quarter of 2026 at the earliest, possibly stretching into early third quarter, depending on how quickly those approvals move. And here's where things get interesting. SpaceX doesn't have time to wait for their Florida Gigabay to start producing Starships locally. That facility won't be operational by the time LC-39A gets its green light. The solution? Move the hardware from Texas by sea. This is where Marmac 31 enters the picture. A 260-foot-long, 72-foot-wide deck barge spotted near Starbase Port, running what Kiko Donchevic called a good first trial run of a transport. The barge doesn't even have its official name yet, though if we're going by Elon's September post, it'll eventually be christened, "You'll Thank Me Later." Classic Musk humor aside, what's revolutionary here is the engineering approach. SpaceX decided to position the vehicles horizontally for transport. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a 230-foot-tall spacecraft and a 250-foot-tall booster, each weighing dozens of tons, being laid down on their sides for a 1,850-kilometer ocean journey through the Gulf of Mexico and around the Florida Peninsula. Initially, each trip carries just one vehicle, either the booster or the ship, not both. But SpaceX plans to scale up quickly, moving multiple vehicles per journey once they've refined the loading and securing procedures. Now let's connect the dots on which Starship makes this historic voyage first. SpaceX has a hard deadline, June 2026, for the Orbital refueling demonstration. This isn't just another test flight. This is the linchpin that determines whether Artemis 3 happens in 2028 or gets pushed back years. 2 Starships launching to orbit, docking in space, transferring cryogenic propellant from one to the other, then both returning for Mechazilla catches. That requires 2 ships, 2 boosters, and 2 operational launch towers, one at Starbase, one at LC-39A. Ship 39 and Booster 19 are up next for Flight 12, likely launching in January. Based on SpaceX's current production cadence of roughly 1 vehicle pair every 2 months, Ship 40 and Booster 20 should roll out in early April. That makes them the prime candidates for the first barge transport. Ship 41 and Booster 21 would follow around June. But here's the critical calculation. Those will be built and flown from Starbase for the second half of the orbital refueling test. Tight when you factor in transport logistics. Pure ocean transit takes 4 to 7 days for heavy cargo barges navigating those waters. Add in horizontal loading with specialized cranes, securing operations, sea conditions, offloading at Port Canaveral, and final ground transport to LC-39A. You're looking at 1 to 2 weeks per shipment. And remember, initially they're only moving one vehicle per trip. That's 2 separate barge journeys, one for the booster, one for the ship, before everything's in position. So if Ship 40 and Booster 20 complete in April, and transport takes until late April or early May, SpaceX still has a month to integrate, test, and prepare for that crucial June orbital refueling mission. But what happens between Flight 12 in January and that June milestone? Does SpaceX just sit idle for 5 months? Not even close. Flight 12 represents the debut of Starship V3, completely redesigned propulsion bay, upgraded heat shield tiles, modified flight control surfaces. First flights of major revisions always reveal problems. Always. SpaceX knows this. That gap isn't empty time, it's deliberate iteration space. They'll collect terabytes of flight data, identify weak points, refine systems, and implement changes before the orbital refueling attempt. Because while Flight 12 can afford setbacks and still provide valuable data, the orbital refueling demonstration absolutely cannot fail. This is where the stakes become crystal clear. Orbital refueling isn't just a technical milestone. It's the fundamental enabling technology for everything that comes after. No refueling means no Artemis lunar landers, no Mars missions, no deep space capabilities, period. NASA needs to see this work flawlessly, which is why SpaceX is dedicating virtually every available resource to nailing this demonstration in 2026. But there's an alternate timeline some analysts are watching. What if technical issues or schedule slips push orbital refueling from June to August? In that scenario, Flight 14 becomes the refueling mission instead of Flight 13, and Ship 41 and Booster 21 become the vehicles transported to Florida. The flexible production schedule allows for this contingency, but either way, the test must happen in 2026. Why? Because June 2027 is marked for an uncrewed Starship HLS lunar landing, the final certification required before NASA puts astronauts aboard. Now here's where speculation gets interesting, and where I need to address something you might have seen floating around. The idea of Flight 13 being a point-to-point demonstration from Texas to Florida. On paper, it sounds perfect. Launch Ship 40 and Booster 20 from LC-39A, Booster returns to catch, Ship deploys test satellites, then flies back to land at Starbase. Real-world data collection for the U.S. Air Force's Rocket Cargo program, which awarded SpaceX $12 million in 2022 to study Starship-based military logistics. The military's interest makes sense from a capability standpoint. Delivering 200 tons of cargo anywhere on Earth in under an hour, for under $10 million per flight, would revolutionize battlefield logistics and humanitarian response. That's transformational for rapid deployment scenarios. But, and this is a critical but, this isn't happening in 2026. SpaceX has entered what I call Artemis sprint mode. Every flight, every test, every resource allocation is laser-focused on the must-have milestones for NASA's lunar program. Orbital refueling comes first. Catching Starship with the chopsticks comes second, because without rapid reusability of the ship itself, the whole tanker concept falls apart. Long-duration orbital flights come third, demonstrating engine relights and thermal management for deep space operations. There's also the regulatory reality. Flying a fully loaded Starship over the densely populated Texas-Florida corridor would generate sonic booms that make Concorde look whisper quiet. The debris risk alone would trigger immediate FAA rejection. If SpaceX does pursue point-to-point testing, They'll choose remote locations like Johnston Atoll, not populated flight paths. Plus, their designated recovery zones overlap with some of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Coordinating Starship operations without disrupting global maritime traffic requires extensive planning that simply hasn't happened yet. What we're witnessing instead is SpaceX executing a precisely choreographed sequence designed to prove every critical technology before Artemis deadlines hit. The Barge transport system represents just one piece of a much larger operational capability they're building. Once LC-39A goes operational, SpaceX gains the ability to launch from two sites simultaneously, effectively doubling their Starship flight rate potential. That's not just about speed, it's about redundancy, flexibility, and demonstrating the kind of launch cadence that makes Mars missions economically viable. The Super Heavy booster is largely mastered at this point. Multiple successful Mechazilla catches in late 2024 and early 2025 prove the concept works reliably. But catching Starship itself? That's the next frontier, requiring different approach angles, different aerodynamic profiles, and pinpoint accuracy after orbital reentry. So when that first Starship finally makes its 1,850-kilometer ocean journey aboard, you'll thank me later, we're not just watching a logistics operation. We're witnessing SpaceX build the infrastructure for a two-coast launch architecture that fundamentally changes what's possible. Ship 40 and Booster 20 making that voyage in April represents the moment SpaceX's vision transforms from Texas-only operations to true nationwide capability. The stakes in 2026 couldn't be higher. Orbital refueling demonstration, first Starship catch, long-duration orbital flights. Every single test builds toward one goal, proving to NASA that Starship can reliably deliver astronauts to the lunar surface by 2028. That barge transport timeline? It's not just about moving hardware, it's about SpaceX racing against the clock to meet commitments that determine whether America returns to the moon on schedule or watches that deadline slip further into the future. What makes this particularly fascinating is how SpaceX continues executing these massive engineering challenges while the world watches every move in real time. 4 years of LC-39A construction, environmental reviews, regulatory coordination, all culminating in a Q2 '26 launch window that depends on a barge successfully carrying the most advanced spacecraft ever built across 1,000 nautical miles of open ocean. Will Ship 40 and Booster 20 make that historic first journey as planned? Will the orbital refueling test happen on schedule in June? Drop your predictions in the comments below. If you found this breakdown valuable, smash that like button and share this with anyone following SpaceX's progress. And subscribe to Space Update 24 hours to stay ahead of every major development as 2026 unfolds. This is the year everything accelerates,